Myself was the third person.
So in this report, it's fair to say that whoever wrote this report said, I was informed by the police, correct?
Correct.
And then the next paragraph begins by saying Detective Mason, as if those are two different people, correct?
I apologize, but I did write the report. It's my signature.
I see something that might be your signature, but that doesn't exist on your copy, does it?
No, I believe I signed that one. But I did write the report, sir.
So, and Detective Williamson's name is first.
He was the primary investigator at the time, sir, yes.
So it was about noontime when you got to 18 Pompey Street on the 6th of March, correct?
Correct.
And you said that you sent this gray/black coat for testing, correct?
Correct.
And the sweatshirt you didn't send for testing. Is that what you testified to?
I believe so, yes.
Well, when you testified in front of the grand jury back in March of 2015, correct?
I did.
And at that time, you were asked about both the sweatshirt and the black gray jacket, correct?
I believe I was.
May I approach, Judge? May. Page 7 on March 31st. Show you a document and ask if you recognize it.
It's a grand jury document.
And it includes some of your testimony, correct?
I believe yes.
And you direct your attention to page 7 and just perhaps just start at line 6 through, say, line 19. Read it to yourself, if you will.
Okay.
And at that time, Mr. Bradley was asking some questions about that coat and the sweatshirt, correct?
Correct.
And you identified both the coat and the sweatshirt as the items that were taken from Ms. Pagano's locker, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Bradley asked you about processing those items for gunshot residue to the state police lab, correct?
Correct.
Do you have any results from the state police lab about the gunshot residue testing that was done on the sweatshirt?
I don't.
And you know that that black/gray coat was also submitted to the for DNA analysis for wearer's DNA, correct?
It was.
And according to your scenario, the person that you see in that video has got this black/gray jacket on with a sweatshirt hoodie on underneath, correct?
Correct.
So the sweatshirt would be between the individual wearing the black jacket and the person's body, correct?
Correct.
Did you submit that sweatshirt for wearer's DNA testing?
I don't, but it was submitted to the crime lab. I don't know if it was tested.
Well,
for
who
DNA.
makes the request for submitting it for DNA testing or GSR testing or fingerprints? Who makes those requests?
One of the detectives assigned to the case.
Are you aware of any detective who suggested that that sweatshirt should be tested for wearer's DNA?
No.
Mr. Bradley showed you some pictures from the MBTA video, correct?
Yes.
Do you remember when you got a hold of that video?
I don't. I don't. I don't recall.
Did you write an investigative report about obtaining the MBTA video?
I did not.
At some point, Mr. Bradley asked you to take a look at one picture, correct, in particular where you could see this white emblem on the upper left chest, correct? Is that correct?
Yes.
And you indicated you were able to see that in that particular picture, correct?
The MBTA video, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
And that video was taken about 7 o'clock in the morning on March 3rd, 2015, correct?
Correct.
And you know that Mr. Harrison was taken into custody by the police on March 3rd, 2015, correct?
March 4th.
I'm sorry, March 4th, 2015.
Correct.
And he had a coat on at that point, correct?
He did.
And it's your testimony, it's your perception that those were different coats, is that right?
Correct.
Now, there was also a jacket recovered or observed in the living room at 18 Pompey Street, correct?
Correct.
And that jacket also had some sort of whiteness or emblem on the upper left side, correct?
It did.
And it said North Face or something like that?
Yes.
And was that jacket ever submitted for any testing?
It was not.
No wearer's DNA or gunshot residue?
No.
Mr. Bradley also had you go through some of these SMS messages, these short messages like text messages, correct?
Correct.
And you identified one from March 4th, 2015, that was sent at approximately 4:02 p.m., correct?
Yes.
And that was the one that says "Get Out House"?
Yes.
And you know Mr. Harrison is being interviewed by the Boston Police detectives at Area B2 at least at 3:05 p.m., correct?
Yes.
And you know the Boston Police detectives took his phone from him on March 4th, correct?
They did.
They did.
Yes.
And when they didn't, you're not aware of anybody observing Mr. Harrison texting anybody at 4:02 p.m., are you?
I don't know that, sir.
Well, the phone was already taken from him at that point, correct?
I don't know what time the phone was taken, sir.
Well, you know he was being interviewed, signed that Miranda form at 3:05, correct?
I do.
And he was under constant police surveillance from that point to the time he was booked, correct? As far as you would know, that would be the procedure, correct?
There was a period after he was interviewed, and it's video recorded, and the detectives leave the room. I wasn't present at the station I was at. I was on Massachusetts Avenue with Detective Medina, but there's a period at that point when the interview ends, and he's in the interview room by
Is
himself.
there any video that shows Mr. Harrison
I am not, sir.
texting anybody?
I am not.
At 4:02 p.m.?
I am not.
And Mr. Bradley showed you an exhibit of a sort of a chart, if you will, that was taken off the computer that was from the school, correct?
Yes.
And that search warrant was executed on March 7th, is that correct?
I believe so, yes. That's Saturday. I think it was a Saturday.
I don't know what day.
Saturday, March 7th. Yes, sir, it is. That's the correct date.
I'll just show you the return, will that refresh your memory?
Sure. Yep, March 7th. Thank you.
And between March 4th and March 7th, you know who had access to that computer, if anybody?
I don't.
Mr. Bradley also showed you a text message that dated March 4th, 2015 at 8:51 a.m. Is that right?
Yes.
And there was something about 30 Iroquois Street in that text?
Yes.
That's the day after Mr. Rodriguez was shot, correct?
Correct.
Did you see anything on that phone prior to March 4th, 2015 that indicated that Mr. Harrison or anybody using that phone knew the address of 31 Iroquois, or 30 Iroquois?
I can't recall, sir.
In fact, there was some text that Mr. Bradley went through from dates before March 4th that talked about meeting around Roxbury Crossing, correct?
Correct.
But nothing about 30 Iroquois, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Bradley also showed you or directed your attention to some of the calls on this extraction report, correct?
Correct.
In the last communication to or from English or from Lewis English was at 4:50 p.m., correct?
4:50 p.m.
On March 3rd, 2015.
The question is if I'm on the 3rd, the last communication is?
The last?
Yes.
Right. And there weren't any communications on that phone, either phone, between Lewis and or Mr. Harrison for the time period of 5 p.m. through to 7 or 7:30 p.m., correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Bradley had you read off some of the messages prior to March 3rd, too, correct?
Yes.
One of them which was dated March 1st, 2015, correct?
Yes.
And that was from Mr. Rodriguez, correct?
Yes.
And basically asking, when are we going to talk tomorrow, correct?
I believe so, sir, yes.
And there's no other communication between March 1st, 2015 at 2:42 and March 3rd, 2015 at 2:13, correct?
I believe so, sir, yes.
And you know that English High School was still in session at the school day ends at roughly 2:20 p.m.?
I don't know what time the school day ends at for English.
Mr. Bradley also had you identify some photographs that were taken off the phone, correct?
Correct.
You don't know who took those photographs, do you?
I don't.
You don't know when they were taken, do you?
I believe the extraction report has a date on them. I believe so.
On these photos, do you see any dates on these photos?
I do not.
When you seized this black or gray jacket from Ms. Pagano's, did you do any investigation to determine how many such jackets are around in the greater Boston area?
I did not, sir.
And Ms. Pagano, when she described the jacket that she'd seen in the storage unit, never made any mention of any emblems or patterns on the coat, did she?
No.
And she never made any mention when she was describing that coat of the lining of the coat, sort of red and white lining?
No.
Thank you.
Redirect.
May I approach?
Yes.
Sir, you were asked some questions on cross-examination about your grand jury testimony, and one question from me. And those were the items that were processed for being prepared. I'm sorry, gunshot residue submitted to the state lab, exhibit number 100, correct?
Correct.
Is that the exhibit 100?
I'm sorry, Mr. Bradley, can you keep your voice up?
Sure, I'm sorry. Is that exhibit 100 that was presented?
It is.
And that indicates that only one coat was sent for testing, is that right?
Correct.
So there was a mistake in the question, but there was documentation for only one coat that was submitted, correct?
Correct.
I'd ask that that be marked as the next exhibit.
Objection.
May I see it again, please? No objection.
See something?
Your Honor, that next number is 151.
Sir, when you first examined the phone, was there, you indicated there was a time difference?
Correct.
So is it time difference between the actual time that you looked on your watch and the time that it was on the phone when you unlocked it?
Form?
Beyond the scope also.
I think you brought it up. Make it overruled. Make it.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And about approximately, what was the time difference?
An hour and 7 minutes.
Okay. And there were times when Mr. Harrison was left alone in the interview area without the video running, is that correct?
Sustained. Is that beyond the scope?
Well, he doesn't have any personal knowledge either.
Do you know whether or not Mr. Harrison was left by himself in that interview room?
Sustained.
Now, Mr. Carroll asked you some questions about the communication between Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Harrison, is that right? About
Yes.
the phone, there's no communication between them, at least from the phone, is that right?
Yes,
I'll show you a video. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Do you recognize those two individuals?
There's an objection, Mr. Bradley.
Yes.
It's in evidence. I don't know where it's leading. I'll give you a few moments to try to make it proper for redirect.
Who are those two individuals?
That's Shaun Harrison and Luis Rodriguez.
Do you recognize these two individuals?
I do.
And who are they?
It's Shaun Harrison and Luis Rodriguez.
And the date on this?
March 2nd, 2015, it's 1:55 p.m.
And where is that video taken from?
That's a hallway at Boston English High School.
Show you the last video on this. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Who are those two individuals?
Shaun Harrison and Luis Rodriguez.
So there was no phone communication, but clearly there was communication between the two of them?
Can we
Yes.
save some time? Can we
Yes.
continue to show the rest of that video?
I don't know if it's going to save time, but if you have an objection, I'll see you at sidebar. You want to do that first?
Well, I don't,
Yes or no?
I have an objection.
Let me see, please.
The video is marked 152 for the record, 152.
Nothing further.
Recross. Mr. Carroll?
Just a minute, please, Judge. You had an opportunity to view that whole video, not just what Mr. Bradley just showed you, correct?
I did.
And it shows, that video he just shows, never shows Mr. Harrison assaulting Mr. Rodriguez, does it?
Correct.
And it never shows him hitting Mr. Rodriguez, does it?
Correct.
And the only time, and in fact, it appears as if Mr. Harrison and Mr. Rodriguez have some interaction with somebody else off to Mr. Harrison's left during that video, correct?
Correct.
And at some point, Mr. Harrison raises his hands and points down the hallway, correct?
Correct.
It's not directed at Mr. Rodriguez, is it?
Correct.
And after that conversation there in the hallway, Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Harrison continue to walk down the hall together, correct?
Correct.
And they're together for a little while after that, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Bradley showed you a document from the regarding gunshot residue, correct?
Yes.
Your testimony in front of the grand jury said that sweatshirt was sent for testing, at least for gunshot residue, correct?
It was sent to the crime lab, yes, sir.
And was that sweatshirt tested for gunshot residue?
No.
And it wasn't tested for wearer's DNA as far as you know?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergeant. You're
Thank you, Your Honor.
excused while he's departing. Announce the next witness.
It's down the comment for Leudi Arias.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to this court and the jury in the issue between the Commonwealth and the defendant shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Good morning, sir.
How you doing?
Good, thank you. Would you proceed, please?
Thank you. Sir, in a loud, clear voice, could you please introduce yourself to His Honor and the members of the jury, spelling your first and last name for the record?
I'm Leudi Arias, and my first name is Leudi, and my last name is Arias.
How old are you, sir?
At the moment, I'm 20.
All right, and turning your attention to March of 2015, how old were you back then?
I was 16.
Okay. And you're here pursuant to an immunity order, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay, that means you have to testify, is that right?
yes, and I didn't want to, but I understand.
Okay. You testified back in the grand jury as well, is that right?
Yes,
Back in, I believe it is sometime in March of 2015, is that correct? March 10th?
I don't recall the date, but I'm pretty sure you know.
Okay. Let me just ask you a few questions. Do you know a gentleman by the name of Shaun Harrison?
A gentleman by the name of Shaun Harrison.
Shaun Harrison?
I think I do. He used to work at the English high school.
And he went by the nickname of Rev?
Yes, it said it on his door.
Okay. Do you see him in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do. I identify him.
Can you describe an article of clothing?
He has like a blue button-up shirt.
Your Honor, may the record reflect identify the defendant.
It will.
Sir, when did you start at English High School? Let me just start with a little bit of background. When did you start at English High School?
I don't remember the exact year, but I know I started like about 5 years ago.
Okay. And did you know a gentleman by the name of Luis Rodriguez?
Yes,
And when did you meet Mr. Rodriguez?
around my house, like where I live at.
Okay. And did you know Mr. Rodriguez prior to your time at English High School?
Yeah, I didn't know him. I didn't met him during the school when I was going to school, but I met him before outside of school.
Okay. And at some point, did you meet him or did you see him attending English High School as well?
Yes,
Okay. And did you know a gentleman by the name of Kevin?
yes.
Okay. And how did you meet Kevin?
I met him around my house.
And where did you live back then?
I live in Rosendale.
In the Archdale area?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you and Kevin, did you and Kevin and Lewis ever hang out together?
Nah, we never hanged out.
Okay, did you and Kevin hang out together?
Yeah,
Okay, and what did you guys used to do together?
we used to chill, do
Yeah,
what
yeah.
regular teens do. You know, smoke, go out to parties, movies. You know, the usual things.
What kind of things did you smoke?
Marijuana, nothing else.
At that time, did you know what Lewis was doing in the school?
At the time, I didn't know, but as time went on, I found out.
What did you find out that Lewis was doing at the school?
Well, from what I found out, I knew he was selling marijuana.
And when did you first meet the defendant, Rev?
I think I was like about around halfway through the year.
And what was the first time you met him? Do you remember?
Nah, I don't. I can't recall that far back.
Okay. And during the first times you met him, did you learn anything about him?
Like, I learned that he was the dean of the school.
Okay. Did you learn anything specifically from him himself?
I can't recall.
Okay. So I'm going to approach for just a brief moment. I may, Your Honor.
Yes. Turning your attention to page 13, is that your name on the front there?
Correct.
And is this a copy of your grand jury minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Turning your attention to page 22, line 15 through 20. Just read those to yourself.
Oh, yeah, I do remember now.
Okay. Does that help refresh your memory?
Yeah.
Okay, what did he tell you himself? What did you learn about him from himself, from Mr. Harrison?
I learned that he had like firearms because he showed me in a picture
And where were those pictures?
on his phone.
Did you ever talk to him about selling weed?
Yes.
Okay, and what did he say to you?
I don't recall like every word. Can I?
Yes, if I may approach you.
Let him finish.
Nah,
I can't remember every word, but
yeah. Nah, I was trying to like revise the paper so I could have my memory fresh.
Do you remember what he asked you about weed?
I think he said if I wanted to sell weed.
Can you describe as best you can as what you said word for word, what he told you?
I just said.
You too smart for, excuse me?
He's already described it.
He said what it is, but move on, please.
How did he describe how you were going to sell weed? How did he bring the conversation up with you?
I don't remember, honestly.
You may.
Again, sir, I'm going to show you page 23, lines 2 through 14.
Yeah, I recall.
Okay. How did he, what did he say specifically?
He said if I was,
If he remembers.
yeah, he said if, said something about if I was trying to make money, and then, so I told him, what do you mean? And he's like selling marijuana, and so then he sent me to the, his office, outside his office, in the room, and he called my friend Kevin in to talk to him. I don't know what they discussed.
You're under non-responsive.
That last part, stricken, I don't know what you're talking about. Redirect him, please.
Thank you. He kicked you out of the office, essentially?
Yeah,
Objection, Your Honor.
Please don't lead him.
he kicked me out the office.
Objection, no questions.
Wait for a question.
All right.
Did he, did he ask you to do anything to Lewis?
He told me that he was Lewis was gonna tell on him,
Objection.
and then he told me to handle it. So to me, handling is like to fight him or something.
Your objection's over with.
And did he offer anything in exchange?
Yeah, I think he said some marijuana in exchange to handle the fight.
To fight Lewis?
Yeah,
Did you fight Lewis?
I did
And where did you fight Lewis?
at English High School.
And where did you fight him specifically?
On the 3rd floor, if I'm not wrong.
And where did the fight start and where did it end?
Started in the hallway and ended in the bathroom.
After that fight, where did you go?
I went home.
At some point, when you came to the grand jury, did you consent to a dump of your phone, sir? Or an analysis of your phone?
Yes.
Did you have communication with Mr. Harrison through the phone, your phone?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. And did you record his name in your phone?
I think so too.
And how did you record it? Do you remember?
I don't.
Do you remember getting any voicemails from Mr. Harrison?
I don't.
Yeah, well, I'll bring it tomorrow. Get in a plastic container. So I'll see you in the morning.
Do you recognize that voice?
I do.
Whose voice is that?
That's Rev's voice.
Do you remember getting that phone call or that voice message?
I honestly, I don't check my voicemails and none of that. I just get straight calls or text message. If it's not that way, then you won't be able to reach me through voicemails.
Okay. Do you remember getting any voicemails from Mr. Harrison?
I honestly, I don't check my voicemails and none of that. I just get straight calls or text message. If it's not that way, then you won't be able to reach me through voicemails.
Okay. May I have a very brief moment, Your Honor? Now, do you remember, you said you don't remember how you recorded, turning your attention to page 41, top of the page, down to line 4. Does that help refresh your memory as to what name you used to record Mr. Harrison in your phone?
Yes.
And what was it?
The bug man.
Now, you indicated that do you remember what guns he showed you?
I don't recall, since it was like 4 years ago. It's hard to remember.
Yes.
Show you line 16 down to the bottom.
I recall.
Okay. Do you remember what the guns look like?
Yes.
What were they?
One of them I believe so to be a handgun. The other one, it looked like a rifle, and there was a chrome one, if I'm not mistaken, that had like a wooden part.
If I may have a brief moment. When, after the fight, you spoke with, who did you speak with?
After the fight, I
Yes.
spoke with the
After
principal.
the fight, who did you speak to was the question.
Well, he already asked that question, he responded, he left the building.
Did you speak with the principal and some police officers?
Yeah, that's during the, like, right after the fight. After that, after I spoke to them, I had left the building, like, to my house.
Did you speak with Lewis as well?
No, I didn't. Oh, yeah, I have spoken to him because the principal, they made me, like, spoke to them and stuff to see what was happening.
What did you tell them about why you fought Lewis?
I fought.
Anything, Your Honor?
Excuse me?
If anything.
Okay. I don't want you to be, it's a long trial. You're doing very well. But please do not be speaking about the particulars of your objection unless I invite it. So, why don't you rephrase, please?
Sure. What did you tell the principal and Lewis the reason why you fought Lewis?
I said, because he was talking, like, about my parents.
What was the real reason you fought him?
Objection.
Because Rev had me for...
Objection. Sustained. Rephrase.
Why did you fight Lewis?
Because he was talking about my parents.
Do you remember? That's what you told the principal?
Yeah.
But why did you? Was it true? Was Lewis talking about your mother?
No, it wasn't true.
Why did you fight Lewis?
Because when we was talking to Rev, he told me that he was going to tell on him, so he had us to... He asked me to deal with it in exchange for some marijuana.
For nothing further.
May proceed, Russ.
Good morning. Afternoon, excuse me. Is it, Kevin introduced you to Mr. Harrison, isn't that true?
Correct.
And do you remember where it was that you were, well, when Kevin introduced you to Mr. Harrison, it was in Mr. Harrison's office, correct?
Yes.
And every time you met with Mr. Harrison, it was always in his office, correct?
Yes.
You never met him out of school, did you?
No, I haven't met him out of school.
And just assume that Lewis was shot on March 3rd, okay, 2015. Okay?
Yep.
When was it, in relationship to March 3rd, 2015, that Mr. Harrison asked you about selling drugs for him?
It wasn't that day. It was like before.
How much before?
Like I said, like a week or two before
One or
the
2
accident.
weeks, not a month before?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was more like 3 weeks.
A week?
Yeah, three weeks.
Page 25, Mr. Burton. You said you testified in front of the grand jury, correct?
Correct.
And that was on March 10th, 2015?
Yes.
And you swore to tell the truth before that?
Correct.
And Mr. Bradley asked you some questions about when Mr. Harrison spoke to you about selling weed, correct?
Yes, correct.
And he asked you how long ago that was, correct?
Correct.
And you said a month ago, correct?
Yes, correct. You left the paper.
Was that the first time that you met with Mr. Harrison? And he asked you, well, let me ask, when you first met Mr. Harrison, it was at least before, say, February 10th or 11th, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
How much before February 10th did you meet Mr. Harrison?
I don't recall.
Well, how many times had you met with him before this conversation about selling marijuana with him?
I say about like 2 or 3 times.
I'm sorry?
I say about 2 or 3 times.
2 or 3 times?
Yes.
And do you remember the first time you met with him where you were?
We was in his office.
And why were you there?
We was discussing. We was discussing about like the fight and stuff, because the fight happened.
So 2 or 3 times before February 10th, he was already asking you about fighting Lewis. Is that right?
Wait. Repeat the question one more time.
We've established it was around February 10th, roughly, that Mr. Harrison asked you to sell weed for him, correct?
Correct.
And it was sometime before that, in your earlier meetings, that he had already started asking about fighting Lewis, correct?
Correct.
So sometime before, and you said you met with him like 2 times before February 10th?
Yeah.
When was the first time you met with him before February 10th?
The first time I met with him was when it was me, him, and Kevin. We was in his office. That was the first time.
How much before that time when he first asked you about selling weed for him?
I don't recall, but I know the first time I met him, I was with him. It was me, him, and Kevin in his office.
In his office?
Yes.
Correct? And not in the cafeteria, correct?
No.
I'm trying to establish now when it was he first brought up this idea with you that he wanted you to fight Lewis for him, okay? Let's say you met with him on February 10th, and that's when he asked you about selling weed, okay? How much before that was he talking to you about fighting Lewis?
I can't recall, because like I can't like estimate. I don't recall.
You think it was a week or 2 before?
It could have been a week or 2.
So in the first or second time you met with Mr. Harrison, he's already talking to you about beating up on Lewis?
No, the first time we met, it was about the fight.
The first time you met with Mr. Harrison, he starts to ask you about fighting Lewis.
Correct.
Is that right?
Mr. Carroll, you have to listen carefully to what he said.
I'm sorry. The
Yeah.
first time you met with Mr. Harrison,
Yeah.
you were in his office, correct?
Yeah.
Sometime before roughly February 10th, correct?
Mhm.
And that first time you met with him, he asked you about fighting Lewis?
Yeah. The first time he was explaining to us how he was telling that he was gonna tell on him and stuff.
So sometime around the 1st of February, you think it was, he started talking to you about fighting Lewis?
I believe so.
Now, you knew that was wrong, right?
Yeah, I know I was wrong.
And when you hear that Mr. Harrison, who's one of the deans of the school, has asked you to beat up a student, correct?
Correct.
And you must have reported that to the principal, right?
No, I didn't report
You didn't
that.
report that to the principal. And there are police officers in the school too, correct?
Correct.
And did you report what Mr. Harrison said to you about beating up Lewis to the police officers?
No, sir.
And was it that first conversation you had with him, when he's talking to you about beating up Lewis, he offers you 3 joints?
Correct.
Now, Lewis was a friend of yours, right?
I'll say he's an associate.
Well, what does that mean? You knew him from where you lived, right?
Correct.
And you'd known him for a couple of years before you met Mr. Harrison, correct?
I mean, I wouldn't say I know him because we never really hanged out. I never got to like.
I'm sorry?
I wouldn't say I know him because I never got the chance to like settle down and actually study him, see how he is. I mean, I knew him by like Lewis, you know. Like throughout the years, I knew him by Lewis. If I see his face, I could recognize
Did
it.
Lewis know your mom?
Yeah, he knew my mom.
So you knew enough about Lewis, and he knew enough about you because you knew each other's families, right?
Yeah, he just knew my mom.
And you didn't want to see any harm to come to Lewis, did you?
No.
Excuse me a minute, Judge.
That's his paper. He left it here.
She's looking for this?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
Mr. Carroll, you looking for this?
Well, I've sort of lost my place for a second, Judge. I apologize. When you met with Mr. Bradley back on March 10th of 2015, well, before you met with Mr. Bradley on March 10th, 2015, you had this mediation at school after the fight, correct?
Correct.
And at the mediation, there was you, correct?
Yes.
And there was the principal, correct?
Yes.
And there was Lewis, correct?
Yes.
And was there any police officers there?
Yes. There was police officer, I think, and Rev was there too, as well.
Was Reverend Harrison in the room the whole time?
Yeah. The whole time.
He didn't step out of the room at some point?
I wasn't paying attention on him being in or stepping out, but I know when the meeting started happening, he was there at the beginning of the meeting.
I'm sorry?
He was there at the beginning of the meeting. I don't know if he stepped out or if he stayed in the whole time.
In any case, the principal asked you about why you fought Lewis, correct?
Yeah.
And you told the principal in the presence of the police officers because Lewis was bad-mouthing your mom, right?
Correct.
And that's what you'd said to Lewis in the bathroom when you were fighting him, right?
Correct.
And then sometime after that, you met with the police, right?
No, sometime after that, after the incident happened, the day after, two detectives came to my house, and they said,
No, I'm not talking about when they came to your house, but sometime you went to the police station, right?
not voluntarily. They came to my house.
Just not that day or the next day, the third or the fourth, but sometime you went to the police station, correct?
What time was it? Like, can you?
I'm sorry?
Well, what can you do? You know the date? Like, when did I went to the police station? Because I don't recall.
You don't recall sitting down in a room with your mom with 2 police detectives asking you questions while it was being video recorded and audio recorded?
Yeah, that's the day that I was trying to explain, but you said no, it wasn't that day.
That's the day I'm talking about. You met with them, correct?
Yeah, they came to my house and picked me up, correct?
Okay, and then they took you to the police station?
Yes.
Okay.
You made it seem like I volunteered.
Okay, and when you sat down to meet with the police officers, they wanted you to talk to them about Lewis, correct? And the fight, correct?
Yeah, and I explained it to them.
And just yes or no, did they ask you
Yes.
to talk about Lewis and the fight?
They did.
And they asked you to talk about what you knew about Shaun Harrison?
Correct.
Yes?
Yes.
And you told the police officers that you fought Lewis because he was bad-mouthing your mom, right?
Correct.
And then you changed your story, right?
No, I didn't change it. I told them that wasn't the truth, that was a lie. That's not really how it went
First sat
down.
down with the police officers.
Yes.
When they asked you about why you fought Lewis, the first thing you said to him was because he was bad-mouthing your mom, correct?
Yes.
And the second time they asked you about why you were fighting with Lewis, while you were meeting in that room, you said it was because Lewis was bad-mouthing your mom, right?
Yes, that was the first one.
Okay. Sometime later in that interview, you changed your story, correct?
Yeah, sometime later in the interview.
Sometime later you told them, oh no, that's not the real truth. The real truth was that Greg put me up to it, correct?
Correct.
And in between the time you said at least twice that Lewis had been bad-mouthing your mom, and the time the police, you tell the police a different story, they're telling you they're not going to prosecute you for anything, right?
Correct.
You're not going to be in trouble for the fight, correct?
Correct.
They're not going to be in trouble for the weed that you do and sell,
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
And they told you that they knew that what you were saying wasn't true, right?
Yep.
And they told you what they thought the real story was, right?
Correct.
And then you changed your story and said, oh, by the way, Rev offered me a couple of joints to beat up Lewis, correct?
Correct.
You weren't having any trouble getting hold of your own weed at that time, were you?
At the time, I don't recall if I was
Well, you were
like...
smoking weed pretty regularly back then, right?
Yeah.
And you were sometimes giving weed to Kevin and to other people, correct?
Nah, I never gave weed to nobody.
Well, sometimes... But you had a regular source of smoke, right?
Correct.
You didn't need to get 3 blunts from Mr. Harrison, did you?
I don't know, maybe that day I might have. Didn't have no connection.
Well, when he told you about the 3 blunts, that was sometime about the beginning of February, right?
Correct.
Did he give you 3 blunts then?
No.
Did you ever get 3 blunts from Mr. Harrison?
Nah, never.
How many times between the 1st of February and March 3rd did Reverend Harrison say to you, you know, if you want those 3 blunts, you got to fight Lewis?
Probably, no, just once.
Never.
Just once in the office.
Just one time,
Yeah,
sometime
when...
around the 1st of February.
Correct.
When Mr. Harrison asked you about, when you say Mr. Harrison asked you about fighting Lewis, had he showed you the pictures of the guns at that point?
No.
When did he show you the pictures of the guns?
It was, I think it was like a little bit before, like it was during the same day, but it was before, like, he asked me to fight Lewis.
Sometime before he asked you to fight Lewis,
Yeah.
he showed you the pictures of the guns.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he asked you to fight Lewis sometime around the 1st of February, right?
Yep.
So was it a week or two before he asked you to fight Lewis that he shows you pictures of the guns?
Nah, I wouldn't say it's a week. I say like...
How much time?
Like a day or 2.
So a day or 2 before, February 1st roughly, Mr. Harrison in his office shows you some guns, right?
Correct.
How many times have you met with Mr. Harrison prior to showing you pictures of guns?
Only once.
Once,
Correct.
when Kevin introduced you.
Correct.
And you had some conversation with Kevin and Mr. Harrison, right?
Correct.
In Mr. Harrison's office.
Correct.
And in that first conversation, there was no talk about guns or drugs, right?
Correct.
So the second time he sees you in his office, he's showing you guns.
Correct.
What did you know about Mr. Harrison at that point, other than that he was one of the deans at the school?
I mean, I seen a picture of like, of I think it was like Latin Kings on hanging on his wall.
You saw a picture of Latin Kings on his wall.
Yeah, like poster.
So you see a picture on his wall. The first time you meet with him,
No, not the first time.
well,
It
you
was,
just said that the first time you met with him was with Kevin in his office, correct?
your question was, what was your question?
The first time you met Mr. Harrison was with Kevin, correct?
Correct.
Kevin introduced you to Mr. Harrison, correct?
Yes.
And you had some conversation for a little bit, the three of you, correct?
Yeah.
The The next time you meet with Mr. Harrison, you're alone in his office with him, correct?
Yes.
And that's when he shows you guns, is that right?
Correct.
And the only thing you knew about Mr. Harrison at that point was because he was the dean at the school, correct?
Yes.
And you'd seen some things on the walls in his office, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
And you thought one of those pictures had something to do with Latin King.
Correct.
And there were a number of other things on the wall also, correct?
Correct.
Things for the Boston Police Department,
I don't recall. I only seen that one poster.
certificates for Mr. Harrison.
I don't recall.
So you remember one picture?
One poster.
Did you know anything else about Mr. Harrison? When he then brings up shows you the guns.
No, I only knew that stuff.
So a man that you've now spent roughly 5 minutes with in your entire life is showing you pictures of guns on his phone?
That's
that
yes,
right?
correct.
And you knew that was wrong, correct?
Correct.
So as of February 2nd, you knew that Mr. Harrison had done the wrong thing showing you pictures of guns, correct?
Correct.
And you'd done the wrong thing by asking you to beat up Lewis, correct?
Correct.
And neither of those times did you go to the principal and say, hey,
No,
this
no,
new dean in the school is messing with me.
no, neither of
You
those
didn't
times.
do that.
No.
You didn't go to the police and say he's doing that.
Nope.
And you said in this meeting with Mr. Harrison, when he asked you to beat up Lewis, he made some comment about Lewis was going to tell on him?
Yes.
Now, isn't it true, Mr. Arias, that you've never said that before in a reported situation?
Yes, I never said that in the
You never
recording
said
session.
that before.
Correct.
You just made it up today.
No, I didn't make it up today.
When did you make it up?
I didn't make it up at all. That's the truth.
Well, when you spoke to the police in that interview room,
Yes.
did you tell the police that Mr. Harrison was told you that he needed Lewis to be beat up because he was going to tell on him?
No, I never said that. I kept that to myself.
I'm sorry?
I kept that information to myself.
When you met with Mr. Bradley and testified in front of the grand jury, did you tell Mr. Bradley and the grand jury that Mr. Harrison had asked you to beat up Lewis because Lewis was going to tell on him?
Can you restate your question? Because you asked a question and you asked something else to it, so I can't I got to focus on one question at a time.
When you testified in front of the grand jury, Mr. Bradley asked you to tell the truth, correct?
Yes.
And he told you he wasn't interested in any of the stuff that you had been involved in before, right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't going to prosecute before, correct?
Correct.
So when you testified in front of the grand jury, did you tell the grand jury that Mr. Harrison had asked you to beat up Lewis because Lewis was going to tell on Mr. Harrison?
Yes, I believe so. I believe so.
Do you remember what point in the grand jury you did that?
I don't recall.
You had an opportunity to review your grand jury testimony before you testified in this case, correct?
Correct.
Did you see it in your grand jury testimony?
I believe so. I've seen it.
I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Figure out another way of doing that, please. Counsel, we have to move on.
Sorry, Your Honor. Wasn't in fact Kevin the first person, did you testify in front of the grand jury? It was Kevin that told you that the Reverend wanted people to fight Lewis because he was afraid that Lewis was going to tell on him?
No, he told me himself.
May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
Page 27. And I'm going to show you your grand jury testimony. Going to page 27, the top of 28, ask you to read line 21 through line 2.
Okay.
Have an opportunity to review that?
Yeah, I recall now.
And Kevin's the first person who said anything to you about fighting Lewis, correct?
Yes.
Now, between roughly February 10th, when he shows you the guns, and you had already asked about fighting Lewis, how many times did you meet with Mr. Harrison between March 10th, February 10th and March 3rd?
Can you repeat your question?
Between roughly February 10th and March 3rd, how many times did you meet with Mr. Harrison?
I don't recall, honestly.
Did you meet with him regularly?
No.
How often?
I don't remember. Like, it could have been once, it could have been regularly, it could have been like once every week. I don't remember.
Did he ever ask you again to sell weed for him?
No.
Did he ever ask you again to fight Lewis for him?
No.
On March 3rd, the day that you fought Lewis, you were late getting to school, correct?
I couldn't remember that far back to remember what time, if I came late or in time.
Did you see Shaun Harrison on March 3rd before you fought Lewis?
I believe so.
Where?
Probably in his office.
I'm sorry?
In his office.
Well, you were late for school. You testified in front of the grand jury about what you'd done on March 3rd, didn't you?
I mean, when I was 16 years old at that time, I probably remembered.
Listen, you've already said that you had difficulty remembering, that's fine.
All right.
But listen closely to his questions, all right?
All right.
When you testified in front of the grand jury, you were asked questions about what you had been doing on March 3rd, correct?
Yes.
And it was only a week after the fight, correct?
Yes.
And when you... Mr. Bradley asked you about whether or not you're on time for homeroom that morning, correct?
I think so.
Your approach, Judge?
Me.
Page 28. I'm going to direct your attention now to your grand jury testimony. Mr. Bradley asked you the question, how did that day start? Do you remember? Did you make it on time for homeroom that day? And you said, no, sir, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So you're late that day, correct?
Yes.
And then you went to did you get to your first period class with Mr. Summerhill?
Yes.
And then you had the second period class with Mr. Summerhill too, didn't you?
Yes.
So you get to school late, you go directly to your class with Mr. Summerhill, correct? correct?
Correct.
And then you stay for your second class with Mr. Summerhill, correct?
Yes.
What time is the second class over?
I don't recall, but I know it was like history or something. The
Do
second
you know what
period.
time it was?
No, I don't.
Okay. And after you left Mr. Summerhill's class, you were supposed to go to your next class, correct?
Correct.
And that was reading and comprehension?
Correct.
And you went to the third floor, correct?
Correct.
And after that, you had health, correct?
Correct.
And it was after your health class and you went to your health class, correct?
Yes.
And it was after your health class that you saw Lewis and pushed him into the bathroom, correct?
Correct.
So you never saw Mr. Harrison that morning before the fight at all, did you?
No, I didn't.
So on the day of the fight, you never had any conversation with Mr. Harrison about 3 blunts, did you?
Not that I could remember.
And Kevin wasn't there with you at any time when Mr. Harrison asked you to fight Lewis for 3 blunts, was he?
No, not that I could remember.
And when you met Mr. Harrison back at the beginning of February about fighting Lewis, he didn't say anything to you about blaming Lewis for bad-mouthing your mother, did he?
No.
Did you ever see any guns in Mr. Harrison's office?
No.
You never saw any marijuana in his office either, did you?
No.
And after the mediation that you had at school, you didn't see Mr. Harrison again that day, did you?
No.
You just left? Is that what you said?
Correct.
Thank you, Judge.
Redirect.
Mr. Carroll on cross-examination asked you about the time in which you had first had a conversation with Mr. Harrison about selling weed. Do you remember when that occurred?
He's already testified when it occurred.
I think he has the right to bring out any inconsistencies, if that's what it is.
Do you remember?
Can you repeat your question one more time?
Sure. Mr. Carroll had showed you some grand jury minutes about the time in which you had a conversation with him, Mr. Harrison, when Mr. Harrison tried to get you to sell weed. Is that right?
Correct.
And Mr. Carroll walked up to you and showed you grand jury minutes. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Carroll indicated that you said a month ago, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to show you large page 25. How long ago was that? What was the actual answer you gave to the grand jury?
I said that it was a month ago.
I would say like a month ago, is that right?
Yeah. So,
Was it a little confusing about the time dates
yes.
for this whole interaction between Mr. Harrison?
Correct.
And at some point, how often would you go into Mr. Harrison's office? You said you didn't remember, is that right?
Correct.
Let me approach.
May.
Lines 9 through 11. Read that to yourself. Does that help refresh your memory on how often you would meet him during the week?
He hasn't said he has a
He's
problem
already
with his memory.
refreshed. Do you want to see it as an inconsistent statement someplace?
Sure. I asked you a question, how often would you see the Rev in his office? And you answered like during the week, I'd say about 2 days a week. Is that right?
Correct.
Mr. Carroll asked you about the time frame in which he'd asked you to fight Lewis. Is that right?
Correct.
you started to say something about fighting Luis Rodriguez. This is a month ago, or was this closer in time to the fight? It was like a little bit closer to the time of the fight happened, okay? And then we go into the day of the fight, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, and then you go, and Mr. Carroll asked you questions about homeroom, correct?
Correct.
Sorry about what?
Homeroom, first period. Second period, we get to reading comprehension on page 30, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then, did you have a conversation about Kevin that morning? Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you had a conversation with Rev that morning, correct?
Correct.
About you fighting Lewis, correct?
Correct.
And that was where?
Objection, Your Honor.
Rev's office.
Counsel, go back there, go back, and you can let him read his statement rather than you.
What's the question?
Just a second. You may, Mr. Bradley, you may have him either read or you may have him confirm an exact recital of what's in that transcript.
Okay.
And would you,
What
for the
page
benefit,
are you on, Mr. Bradley?
excuse me, Mr. Carroll, I'll do it, just wait a second. Will you also disclose the page and line number?
Yes, Shaun. Page 30, line 15. What did I ask you?
You asked who told him to fight him.
And what was your answer?
Rev.
And that was when? The next line. Okay?
After reading comprehension, you went downstairs to the third floor.
What's the, again, Mayor Park?
No,
I object.
that's fine, it's overruled.
Where's Rev's office? And your answer was on the first floor, is that right?
Correct.
And did you, at some point after health class or before health class, did you go down to Rev's office with Kevin?
Yes.
And what happened when you got to Rev's office?
We had a conversation.
About the fight?
Yes.
Counsel, Mr. Bradley, differentiate as to whether you're asking his present recollection or whether or not that's a prior statement that
It's
he made.
a prior statement, Shaun.
Were they all prior statements because I lost on it?
Yes.
So you were asking the question, you let him read his answer.
Correct. Who told you to fight Lewis?
Rev.
No further questions.
Mr. Arias, do you have currently a clear memory of what happened in February and March of 2015?
I don't, because I
You
can't.
don't, okay. So when somebody asks you a question and you say, I don't remember, and they put something in front of you, does that really refresh your memory, or are you just reading what's on the paper?
No, I really do refresh my memory.
It does refresh your memory?
Yes.
So when I put the paper in front of you and went through what you did that morning, coming late to school, first period, second period, third period, that refreshed your memory about what you did?
Yeah, I remember coming late to school.
And you remember going to first period, Mr. Summerhill, second period, Mr. Summerhill, third period, reading and comprehension, going to fourth period class, and that was when you ran into Lewis and fought him, correct?
Yeah, I think I fought him around third, fourth period.
And then when I asked you a question about you didn't see Reverend Harrison at all that day, you said, that's right, you didn't see him, correct?
I couldn't recall.
You didn't say you couldn't recall,
Counsel?
did you?
Counsel,
I didn't.
it's out there.
And Mr. Bradley was just asking about the time frames. I used the dates roughly February 1st and February 10th, correct?
Yeah, I couldn't recall the whole dates. I couldn't recall the
You agreed
dates.
that those were times are roughly correct, correct?
Yes.
Because you had a current memory that it was roughly February 1st that you first met Mr. Harrison, correct?
That I had a current memory.
I'm sorry?
Can you repeat with your question?
So it was roughly around February 1st when you first met Mr. Harrison, correct?
Yes.
And you met him with Kevin, correct?
Yes.
And the next meeting you had, you say he asked me to sell weed for him, correct?
Correct.
And in some time in between there, he showed you some pictures of guns, correct?
Correct.
And you have a current memory of that, correct?
Correct.
And then your current memory that you actually met with him twice a week, every week from February?
I don't know from the time frame, but I'm pretty sure I have met him a couple times. Like now I'm getting my memory back.
Did you meet with him twice a week, every week between February 1st and March 3rd?
I wouldn't say yes or no. I couldn't recall the exact, if it was every 2 weeks, every 2 days, every week, or every 2 weeks.
Thank you.
I think that's it. You're excused, thank you very much, sir. Jurors will take lunch. We'll see everyone back at 2 o'clock.